Most people believe that if you have a child and that child lives a happy, meaningful life, then you deserve praise. And if the child suffers terribly, that's just bad luck. That's tragic, but not your fault. After all, parents can't control everything in their child's life. So it does not make sense to blame them for the things that they can't control. This intuition was challenged in a recent paper, The Parental Gambit: Moral Luck and Lives Worth Living, published in Bioethical Inquiry by philosopher Marcus Tio. The paper introduces a powerful idea called the parental gambit. The claim is simple: parents who create happy lives are lucky but not praiseworthy. Parents who create miserable lives are blameworthy and not merely unlucky. If this argument works, then it has serious consequences for antinatalism, parental responsibility, and the idea that children owe their parents gratitude. Let's look at some ideas presented by Tio, like what is moral luck, why procreation is a gamble, the two key asymmetries that he identifies, and why this matters for antinatalism, parental duties, and filial piety. So let's start with moral luck. Moral luck happens when we judge people differently because of outcomes that they could not fully control. Imagine two people driving while drunk in their own cars. One reaches home safely, the other kills a pedestrian due to an unpredictable event. They both made the same choice, but we blame them differently. Why? Because outcomes matter even when luck plays a role. The second drunk driver was just unlucky to have a pedestrian crossing his way, but we still blame him more than the first drunk driver who just happened to be lucky to not have any pedestrian being hit. So we can be held morally responsible for something which is out of our control. This is moral luck. Now, let's also add more to those drunk drivers. They are not some school going teenagers who don't know the risks of drunk driving. They are fully grown adults and are fully aware of the risks that they could kill someone because of their reckless action. And even after that, they did what they did. This adds another layer onto the blame for driving while drunk. Prior knowledge matters. When someone knowingly undertakes a risky action, we don't excuse them just because that bad outcome involved luck. If the harm occurs, the blame remains. If harm does not occur, we don't give them praise. Tio uses one example for this. Imagine a heavy smoker sitting beside a non smoker in a confined space. The smoker is well aware that if he smokes, this might put the other person at risk because of second-hand smoke. So the blame remains on the smoker irrespective of whether the non-smoker actually gets sick or not. This prior knowledge of the risk one is taking is called ex ante knowledge. Both these things, that is moral luck and prior knowledge, could be combined to see why procreation is a serious gamble. Similar to that second drunk driver who did not have any control over a pedestrian coming under his car, parents don't have control over accidents, illness, disability, violence, economic collapse, climate effects, and psychological suffering. Even the most careful, loving parents know this. So, when parents decide to create a person, they are effectively rolling the dice on someone else's life while having prior knowledge of the risk. Tio calls this gamble the parental gambit. There are two possible outcomes from this gamble. The child has a life worth living or a life not worth living. And there's an interesting asymmetry between these two outcomes. Tio argues that all lives necessarily contain suffering, but not all lives necessarily contain compensating goods. Pain, frustration, illness, loss, these are unavoidable features of existence, but there is no guarantee that these negative things will be compensated by equal goods. He calls this the likelihood asymmetry. All existence necessarily contains suffering. However, all existence does not necessarily contain the contravailing defeaters to this suffering. So, we see that procreation is a gamble because there are at least two different outcomes possible. It is subject to moral luck because these outcomes could be realized through things that are beyond controls of the gamblers, that is the parents. And there is an asymmetry in the likelihood of events that would dictate those outcomes. There is one more piece to add, and that is prior knowledge. Most parents would know these things before they decide to have children. They are aware of the risks of life or likelihood of suffering in life. This completes the argument for what Tio calls the resultant moral luck asymmetry, or in simple words, praise versus blame asymmetry. Parents knowingly take a moral risk while having a child. Now, if the child's life turns out not worth living, then the parents are to be blamed for that. But if the child's life does turn out to be worth living, then we can't praise the parents for that. Remember, there was nothing praiseworthy of a drunk driver who did not hit anybody because he was lucky. Tio proposes two areas where this argument helps. One, of course, is antinatalism. It provides yet another alternative argument for antinatalism. You don't have to believe that all lives are bad, that existence is always a harm. You only need to accept that a life not worth living is bad, that procreation can create such a life, and that parents knowingly take this risk. And if there is no praise for success and blame for failure, and failure cannot be ruled out, then procreation becomes a zero sum moral act. If avoiding moral blame matters at all, then refraining from procreation becomes rational. This fits naturally with risk based antinatalism, especially Mati Hairi's work. Then there are some practical implications also. First, the duties of children towards their parents are undermined. Children owe no gratitude merely for being born, since they were subjected to a gamble they never consented to. Second, parental duties strengthen. Parents may owe to their children more than just minimal care, because existence itself imposes unavoidable harm. So parents ought to pay for the damages that they cause to their children. Note here that the causes of those damages may be beyond the control of parents, and yet they owe to their children for those damages. That is one of the main points of this paper. Third, procreative counseling matters. People should be explicitly informed that having children is not morally neutral, it is morally risky. That paper was about individual procreation or the risks involved in a particular instance of procreation. But we also have something which analyzes procreation on a collective level, on a level of humanity. This one is not about blaming mothers and fathers or telling anyone what to do, but something much larger. What happens when humanity as a whole keeps creating new people in a world that reliably produces extreme life destroying suffering? That is a question explored in the paper Global Horrendous Evil, a cautionary tale against procreation by Tianxiang Lan, published in Asian Bioethics. The main topic is horrendous evil, not like everyday pain or mild disappointments, but something more serious and stronger. We are talking life ruining suffering. This is suffering so severe that a reasonable person could honestly doubt if their life was worth living at all. Things like genocide, torture, childhood sexual abuse, severe mental illness, terminal childhood cancer, slavery or human trafficking, extreme war trauma, long term imprisonment with abuse, and so on. This kind of suffering engulfs a person's entire life, and crucially, no one chooses to risk this before being born. Such a horrendous evil was also the central topic of the story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. The story imagines a city where almost everyone lives a wonderful, happy life. There is prosperity, art, peace, joy. But there's a condition. There is one child locked in a dark room. The child is abused, neglected, and miserable. And the happiness of everyone else in that Omelas town depends on that child continuing to suffer. The story concludes with those who, after they come to know about the plight of the child, walk away from Omelas. For these people, horrendous suffering of that child cannot be justified by the happiness of millions of Omelasians. Lan capitalizes on this intuition. Intuitively, the wellness of Omelasians cannot morally justify or outweigh the horrendous evil suffered by this child. This intuition is central to my argument in this paper. Now, we tend to follow this intuition in other scenarios. Consider a case of bullying, for example. Let's say there are 10 bullies torturing one innocent victim. On a pure utilitarian calculation, one person is harmed, but 10 people are getting pleasure out of it. Even then, this is not something we would approve of. Secondly, this intuition is not specific to antinatalists. Even pronatalists distinguish between the orders of harm. So a harm can be greater or smaller in magnitude, but it can also be of a higher order altogether. Some harms are so bad that they cannot be linearly compared with other harms just in magnitude. That harm is the key to Omela's story. It is not just a side effect of the joy of other Omelasians. Their wellness depends on this child being tortured. Lan asks the question if our intuitions would still hold true if this was not the case. Also, what if no one at present is suffering that harm and will affect someone in future as a side effect of our actions? And we don't know who that would be until they come into existence. So Lan constructs another story about a city called Omegas. In this version, a machine keeps a city safe and happy, but a flaw is discovered in that machine. If the machine keeps running, one random child in the future will suffer horribly for life. No one knows who that child will be. The suffering is not a tool, it's a side effect. The city can stop the machine. Maybe they can do a referendum on whether to stop the machine or not. Irrespective of the result of this referendum, that is, whether the machine is stopped or not, the existing Omegasians would live a joyful life and no one would suffer terribly. Just the life of future Omegasians would not be as joyful. The child's misery is a mere side effect of the machine's operation. It is a product of a mistake rather than intentional design. Also, the child is not present. It is a prospective child who will suffer if the machine is not stopped. No one knows who that child would be. Misery as a side effect and of an unknown prospective child makes this case similar to the case of procreation. Lan assumes that people's moral intuition is the same for Omelas and Omega scenarios, that the high level of happiness enjoyed by Omegasians cannot justify or outweigh the horrendous evil the child suffers. In general, it is wrong to allow horrendous evil to happen to some people to bring favorable outcomes for many other people. But how many is that many other people? Can there be a threshold in terms of number of people beyond which horrendous evil on one child is justified? One could imagine an evil so bad that it cannot be justified no matter how many people are benefited. But Lan keeps this practical. Omelas was an average city. We can take some average population of cities across the world and say that one child per such population is tortured in Omelas. If you consider the evils that are happening today in the world and take the number of people who are tortured by these evils, then even on conservative estimates, it is far greater than one person per city. Land does some math and shows that in Omela's story, just based on the urban populations and number of cities in the world, there could be one victim per 200 to 500,000 enjoyers. But if you consider the populations that are suffering horrendous evils today, that ratio comes to about one victim per 30,000 enjoyers. So anywhere between 6 and 16 horribly tortured victims for joyful Omelasians in today's real world. In other words, we live in a world which, even by very conservative estimates, is at least 6 times worse than Omelas. You could argue that things are bad, but they are getting better. We have technology which is constantly improving lives, and we have more social awareness than before about issues related to justice, equality, and so on. So you may hope that technology, medicine, greater wealth will solve it, or moral progress can solve it, or some combination of those factors will compensate justifiably for the horrendous evil that exists in the world today. The paper carefully examines all of this. Many horrors are not caused by scarcity of resources like abuse, sadism, ideology, power, prejudice. Put simply, no amount of resources can render the level of horrendous evil excusable if people use such resources to hurt each other. To prevent all abuse, you would need constant monitoring, no privacy, no personal freedom. This is usually seen as dystopian, and for good reason. It is plausible that people in a police state like this will live in fear, which may increase rather than reduce the incidence of horrendous evil. And even with all the progress, it is unrealistic to think that disease and injuries will not continue to cause horrendous evil. There will always be incurable illnesses and psychological breakdown. There will always be new ways for bodies and minds to fail. It is highly plausible that there are infinite ways for the human body and psychology to go wrong. Thus, there will always be substantial number of cases of incurable diseases and injuries, a non-negligible proportion of which will be serious enough to constitute horrendous evil. What about social ethical progress? Can you make people more moral, and will that bring down the level of horrendous evil? Well, people have prejudices, abusive predispositions, and it is unrealistic to think that they would regulate these in the times of conflict. On the contrary, many people conceal their prejudices in public while using them in private. Now, there is also a possibility of using technology to make people more moral, sort of techno economic moral upgrade. Firstly, Technology promises many things but also comes up with new problems of its own. Secondly, power corrupts even the enlightened minds. People can have enhanced empathy, for example, and still employ it to satisfy their own biases. So there is no way of bringing down horrendous evil in the world to just below the level of even Omelas, let alone eliminating it altogether if this collective project of human procreation continues. Lan also addresses a few objections to his arguments. Objections like thought experiments are theoretical or constructed to draw out some conclusions, but well, they resemble what's going on in the real world, and Lan provides some realistic maths to show it. Note that this argument is not saying that individual parents are evil or they should be forced to stop having children. It is just pointing out that humanity should be honest about the cost of reproduction. Creating life comes with victims, not just beneficiaries, and antinatalism is not pessimism but moral consistency. The paper concludes that even with a more optimistic assumption about the future of humanity, procreation will perpetuate horrendous evil in the world. No Dice, a Bengali short film by Sagor Islam, has been selected for Nepal Africa International Film Festival 2026. No Dice is themed on antinatalism and has been selected by many film festivals in the past. Lawrence even did an interview of Sagor Islam, the director of this film. It is not released yet for public viewing, but congratulations to Sagor and the team for growing acceptance of this film. Antinatalism Japan did another street outreach in Tokyo on 14th December. On your screen, you can see various placards that they used. This is one of the few groups that do street outreaches for antinatalism consistently. Here you can see their scheduled outreaches for the entire of 2026. There is at least one outreach per month and sometimes two. I hope other countries and groups from other countries take some inspiration from them. Meet the Antinatalists who say having children is cruel and unethical is the title of an article on cityam.com. It covers Lawrence's street outreaches in London and has photos of Lawrence holding placards along with Nimrod and other antinatalists. Alexis Smith, who helps Lawrence shoot some of his videos, has poignant story to tell. Originally from Nicaragua, Alexei was adopted at 19 months old alongside his sister Tania by his British mother Jenny Smith. Both born in extreme poverty in the early 1990s, Tania had been hospitalized 7 times due to malnutrition before she was even a year old. It's really weird, but I never really gave adoption much thought before I became an antinatalist. Unlike my mom and sister who feel very strongly for it, Alexis says. Since becoming one, it's given me more of a relationship and a peace with it that I never had before. There is a lot of kids out here who need love and care. Along with Lawrence's work, the article also covers an antinatalist from Canada. Lawrence has had a vasectomy, and this female activist from Canada chose to remove her fallopian tubes. But the difference in their experiences was significant both biologically and socially. Female sterilization procedures are painful, and the pain can last for days, and usually doctors are not ready to perform these on unmarried child-free women. All in all, the article was a good coverage of antinatalism and Lawrence's work. Speaking of Lawrence, he arranged for a UK antinatalist Christmas meetup in London where many antinatalists came together, went for bowling, and then had a dinner at a vegan restaurant in London. I have blurred most of the faces in here, but you'll get to know more details about the event on Lawrence's channel. And on that note, I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Thanks for watching.